Hello and welcome back to Humanizer, where I'm converting the MakeHuman open source 3D character creator into Godot 4. Last time I optimized the code by removing the helper geometries and regenerated the shape keys and shading. This is because there are 1200 shape keys in the MakeHuman config, so it needs to run faster. And this time I'll be fixing the skeleton. As you can see, it no longer aligns with the mesh. And then next time I'll fix the clothing and import the eyes and teeth geometries as well. First, I'll make a new 3D scene to load and pre-calculate the skeleton bone positions. Then I'll drag the human.blend from the human model folder and right-click to make local. And I don't need the animation player or the rig reduced right now. So basically I just generated a new human in MPFB in Blender, and then I disabled all the shape keys and created the Mixamo skeleton. So this is the basis shape for the skeleton. Then I'll attach a new script to the base node built in, and I'll make a new onReady variable to point at the skeleton 3D node. Then onReady, I'll loop over the bone IDs in skeleton bone count, and for now I'll get the bone name equals to skeleton find bone, or get bone name. You use find bone to get the ID from the name. And then I'll just print the bone name and run that. So now you can see it's looping over all of the bones in the skeleton. Now instead of the bone name, I'll get the global rest transform from the bone ID, and to get the position from a transform you use the .origin. So I'll get the transform .origin and print the coordinates. So you can see now it's printing the vector 3s. So now I want to save this to a file. So I'll make a new empty dictionary for the skeleton data, and I'll set the skeleton data basis equal to an empty array. And then I'll just append the coordinates to the array, and when it's done, I'll use the save.json function, which just opens a new file and uses storeline json.stringify. So this is a custom function from the forums. So I'll use I want to save this in build skeleton /skeleton data.json, and I'll pass the skeleton data dictionary. So now if I run this, you can see that it's made a new skeleton data.json, which has the basis element and all of the coordinates. Now I want to pre-calculate the bone coordinates for each shape key. So I'll get the shape key data using the utils read JSON, and I'll get the generate mesh shape key data JSON that I generated in the last episode. This has all of the coordinates of the shape keys pre-calculated corresponding to their Blender ID. Now I want to loop over the shape key names in shape key data dot shape keys, and for now I'll just print the shape name to make sure that's still works. So it did print out the shape key names. Now I need to calculate the position of each bone using the rig.mixamo.json, which is found in the Blender config folder. This contains all of the bone names and the default position and the calculated position. There's a mean strategy which has 2 indexes, and it just gets the average of those 2. And then there's the cube strategy, which gives a cube joint name here, like joint left elbow. It'll be the cube strategy. And these joint names are listed in the base mesh vertex groups.json, which is also in the Blender config folder for MPFB2. So this at the bottom contains a range of 8 vertex indexes for each joint, and you just get the average of those 8 points. So it'll be much more efficient to pre-calculate this than to be getting the position of all 8 for each joint in the skeleton for each shape key whenever you change the skeleton. So I already have the functions to get the average bone vertex and check the strategy. So I'll just copy those over. And when you load, this is the skeleton builder that I had previously. So, and when you load the Mixamo config, you have to replace the colons with underscores so that it matches with the skeleton in Godot naming conventions. So I'll add that function as well, and then I'll set the Mixamo config equal to load Mixamo config. Then I'll pass the shape name as a parameter of the average bone vertex. And add it to the function. Now I don't need to get the Godot index because the shape key file is indexed by the Blender index. And this function looped over the blend shapes in the mesh to get the value of each one, but since we're calculating it for a single shape key, I'll just get rid of that function as well and get the shape key data at shape keys at shape name at Blender index and add it to the bone position, and then it divides by the index array dot size. So now if I print the coordinates, it throws an error. It says that the index 4059 is invalid on the shape key dictionary, and the shape key name is African female baby, so I know that this shape key should affect all of the bone positions. And the problem is that the shape name is a dictionary and the indexes are strings. So I'll get the string index and cast the Blender index as a string and call that instead. So now it says it can't add a vector 3 and an array. So I need to use the array to vector function that I made in utils. It just makes a new vector from the array. And if I run that, now I get the invalid index 4059 again, but now the shape key name is the left earlobe. So I know this does not affect the skeleton position, and so I'll check if the string index is in the shape key data at the shape key name, and if it is, then use the shape key position. Otherwise, I'll use the basis position at the Blender index, and this is an array, so I'll use the int. And now it successfully prints out the pre-calculated position for each bone and for each shape key. Now, instead of printing the coordinates, I want to add it to the skeleton data. So first I'll split up the functions in ready into make basis and make shape keys, and I'll copy that and call both of these before I save the JSON. Then I'll want to set the skeleton data dot shape keys equal to an empty dictionary, and for each shape key I'll set the shape keys at the shape name equal to an empty array, and instead of printing the coordinates, I'll append the coordinates, and I need to convert this to a array from a vector 3 so that the JSON will store it correctly. So now if I run this again and open up the skeleton data, you can see that we have the basis shape and then all of the coordinates for the bones for each shape key listed. Now this includes the nose and earlobe. So I know these do not affect the skeleton, so I want to automatically cull out these kinds of shape keys on the face. But first, I forgot that the coordinates need to be relative to make the skeleton calculation faster, and currently they are absolute. So after I calculate the bone position, I need to subtract set the chords equal to the coordinates minus the skeleton data basis at the bone ID. So now this will be relative. So now if I run this again and open up the skeleton data, you can see that the coordinates are much smaller decimals for each of the shape keys, and the last two, the earlobe and the nose, are very close to 0. They're slightly off because the skeleton basis is from the Mixamo rig, and the calculation was from the mesh position, so they'll be slightly off, but basically these should be 0, so I need to check if the index exists in the shape key at all. So I'll make a new variable in shape key equals false, and if it finds the index in the shape key, set in shape key equal to true, then if in shape key, divide the bone position and return it, otherwise return vector3.0, so an empty vector. But now, since this 0 vector is relative, I need to make the bone position here relative, or it will just subtract the basis from 0, returning the negative. So, and I want it to calculate as 0. So the best way to do this is first in the load Mixamo config, I'll set the bone ID equal to the skeleton find bone at the out name, which is after we've replaced the colons with underscores. And then I'll get the parent ID from the parent name, and in the out data, I'll set the data at bone ID instead of the out name, so we're using the index, and I'll set the parent equal to parent ID. And now I can make the out data a array, and I'll resize the out data to the skeleton bone count. Now if I run this, it throws an error because the skeleton data is null because it hasn't loaded yet. So I can just make the mixamo_config an onReady variable. And if I run it again, now it says that it can't find the hips index on the mixamo_config because we changed it to the ID. So I'll get the bone ID instead and change that to an int. And then in the calculate bone position, I'll pass the bone ID instead. So now it doesn't throw the errors, and I can move subtract the basis from the coordinates into the average bone vertex. And pass the bone ID as a parameter of this function as well. So now if I run it again, and open up the skeleton data, you can see that the last two bones are set to 0 vectors as expected. So basically I want to cull these two shape keys from the skeleton data since they don't change any of the positions. So before I do that though, I'll make a new function to check if the index array is in the shape key. So I'll loop over for each blender index in the index array, get the string array, and if the string index is in the shape key data, shape keys at shape name, then return true, otherwise return false. And instead of here, I'll check if the index array is in the shape key, then do the calculation. Otherwise, return the 0 vector. So that'll be slightly more efficient. And if it is in the shape key, it'll probably return true on the first index, so it will only have to check one. Now to get rid of the zeroed out shape keys, in the make shape keys function, instead of setting the skeleton data shape keys at shape name, I'll make a new variable shape data equal to an empty array and move the shape keys down. Then I'll make another variable for shape changed equals false. And after I calculate the coordinates, if the coordinates do not equal vector 3.0, then set shape changed equal to true and append the coordinates to the shape data instead of the skeleton data. Now, after it's done looping over all of the bones, if the shape did change, then set the skeleton data shape keys at shape name equal to the shape data. And if I run that again, you can see that the last two shape keys are gone, and it ends with Caucasian male young now. So that worked. And now I need to set the basis. I need to convert the basis from the vector 3, which is why it's a string in parentheses, into the array so that it can be parsed by the JSON. But I don't want to convert the basis, skeleton basis array until after I calculate the shape keys, since I'm subtracting it from the bone position here. So after make shape keys, but before it saves, I'll loop over the bone ID in skeleton data basis dot size, and I'll set the skeleton basis at bone ID equal to vector 3 to array of the basis at bone ID. And if I run it one last time, you can see these are now formatted as arrays instead of strings, and that will make it easier for the skeleton builder to read everything. So now I can open up the skeleton builder. As you can see, it's not working. So I want to load the skeleton data, but since I'll be accessing the data every time you change the values, and not just once to generate it, I'll want to convert the arrays into vector 3s when I load the data. So I'll make a new function to load the skeleton data. And I'll make a new variable for the data and read the skeleton data JSON file. Then I'll loop over the data.basis.size and set the data basis at I equal to convert the array to vector 3 of the data basis at I. And then I'll want to loop over the shape key data in the skeleton as well. So for shape name in the shape keys, then for I in shape keys at shape name dot size, and then I'll set the shape key at the shape name at I to the vector 3 as well. So now all of the data has been pre-converted into vector 3s, and I'll return the data variable. Now in the build skeleton function, I'll make a new position array for the bone data equal to skeleton data basis, and you'll want to duplicate it so that you don't overwrite the original data. And we'll still loop over the bone IDs. You don't need the Mixamo config or the bone name. Set the bone position to the position array at bone ID, and I'll get the parent bone equal to skeleton get bone parent from the bone ID. And if the parent ID does not equal -1, then get the parent transform and multiply it by the bone position. Then we'll set the position and the rest pose and create the skin from the rest positions. Now I'll want to reopen this because I added the skeleton data variable, and now when I update the skeleton, you can see that it's just the basis shape and it doesn't change at all. So now I want to loop over the shape keys and add them to the bone position array. Now instead of looping over every blend shape for each vertex to calculate the mesh position, I just want to loop over the shape keys that affect the skeleton position, since a large percent of the shape keys are just for the face. This will be much more efficient. So I'll loop over the shape name in the skeleton data shape keys, and I'll get the shape ID from the human mesh find blend shape by name and pass the shape name. Then I'll get the shape value equal to human mesh get blend shape value from the shape ID. And I want to make sure the shape value does not equal 0, otherwise we'll just be multiplying by 0. Then for bone ID in the skeleton bone count, I'll get the bone position equal to the skeleton data shape keys at shape name at bone ID, and I'll want to multiply this by the shape value, which will act as a weight, so it's always less than 1, between 0 and 1, so it will be a % of the end position for the shape key. And then I'll add the new bone position to the position array and save. So now if I update the values, you can see that the bones have collapsed, and I was actually pretty frustrated with this. I spent some time debugging, but eventually I realized that I was dividing the bone position and returning it in the for loop. So after the first index, it was just returning it, and this needs to be outside of the for loop. So if I regenerate the skeleton data and reopen the skeleton builder to get the new values, now you can see when I change the slider that the skeleton is updating with the shape keys, and the animation player is still working. So that's all very good. Now I can make it slightly more efficient by storing the shape ID instead of the shape name in the skeleton data. So I'll make a new variable in the make shape keys for the shape ID equals 0, and I'll just use a counter for this, although you could, so I'll just add 1 at the end of the loop, although you could get the shape key ID from the mesh as well. And then I'll set the skeleton data shape keys at shape ID to the shape data. I still want this to be a dictionary though, because if some of the middle keys are deleted because they don't affect the skeleton, I still want it to keep the original shape key index. So after running the load skeleton data again and reopening the skeleton builder, now when I get the shape name in the skeleton data shape keys, I'll just set this to shape ID, and I want to, because it will be a string, I'll cast as an int when I get the shape value, and I'll point at the shape ID to get the bone position. So now if I save that, I'll just verify that the skeleton still works. So it looks like everything is still lined up. So that's all for the skeleton builder optimization. It's now building from the shape key file instead of calculating each vertex from 8 different points on the mesh. And next time I'll fix the make clothing so that the clothes actually fit. And then I'll upload all of it to the repository all at once so I don't break anything. So that's all for now. Thank you for watching and have a great day.